This is Outside of New York, in-depth discussions with members of the art world who live and work outside of New York. And here's your host, Craig Gould.
Maggie Adler is curator at the Amon Carter Museum of American Art in Fort Worth, Texas, where she organizes exhibitions that explore the breadth of American art that exists within and outside the museum's collection. A native of rural New York, she received her higher education at Williams College in Williamstown, Massachusetts. While there, she obtained a BA in Classical Languages and Art History and a Master's in Art History. Prior to the Amon Carter, Maggie held positions at Williams College Museum of Art and the Addison Gallery of American Art at Phillips Academy, as well as a fellowship at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. In addition to her curatorial duties, she also serves as co-chair for the Association for the Historians of American Art. Though her research focuses on 19th-century art, she's also passionate about collaborating with contemporary artists to create large-scale commissions, and has worked with the likes of Jenny Holzer, Pepon Osorio, and Gabriel Dawe to create site-specific installations. I recently sat down with Maggie in the main gallery of the Amon Carter, where we discussed her attraction to Williams College, her love of Winslow Homer, the color theory of Michel Eugene Chevreul, her winding career path, what makes the Amon Carter unique, and finding contemporary work that fits within the museum's narrative. That has come and get your cupcakes, come and get, your donuts.
We have to stop celebrating people here at the Amon Carter because it's monkeying with my health.
Exactly. Celebrate birthdays only once a month.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So, right. Well, again, Maggie, I appreciate you being willing to sit down and talk to me. And I have thus far, in my conversations, I think this is probably going to be episode 17 or so. We've talked to some familiar faces like Gabriel Dawe, and I'm trying to have a variety of guests, that are in the art world, and the focus of my program is, that art world outside of New York, and how do artists survive and thrive here between the coasts? How do art professionals survive and thrive? How do arts organizations do what they do here in Texas and in Middle America? And so I really am excited about the opportunity to sit down and talk to you about you and your role here and your insight on arts here in this part of the world.
Happy to join you.
Yeah.
I think this is like an unexpected environment for, I consider myself really lucky, having come from the East Coast and recognizing that as an art center. And arriving here, I really think this is the best kept secret in terms of curatorial work. And for me, my academic background is in historical art, but I've always had a passion for working with living artists. And I think there comes a point in every curatorial career where you have to make a determination of what is your zoomed in laser beam focus of what your career is going to look like. And my assumption when I came to the Amon Carter was I had made significant steps along the path of being a historical curator.
Right.
And that the contemporary art would be something that I would find fulfilling in my personal life. But, I would follow a very particular museum trajectory.
Sure.
And stay as long as that was possible, which in my mind was a couple of years, and then move on to the next step in historical curating. And what's brilliant about this museum and what's wonderful about Texas is there are fewer barriers that mean that you have to have that laser beam focus.
Right.
So I got here, and this was an institution in the midst of growth and development and change, and that means that rather unexpectedly, I was able to combine the historical with the contemporary in one institution to tell a full story of American art, which doesn't stop when Jackson Pollock achieves success and then becomes something else. So it's this rare environment. All of my friends who have similar backgrounds to mine in terms of training, who have come to Texas, they're just pinching themselves. They're really pleased with the decision, and they almost never leave.
Right.
And so this is, I've been able to grow with the institution and to have supporters for this museum who will come to every exhibition, regardless of whether they knew about the artist and had a proclivity toward that artist in the first place. So like even my first exhibition openings, it wasn't about, well, this is an exhibition of artist B and I love artist B, so that's why I'm coming. It was, this is a museum that we believe in, and when we believe in the cultural institutions in our backyards.
Sure.
So we're coming.
Right.
And that was coming from Philadelphia. That was an epiphany for me, that people would just show up and learn something and be open-minded to a new experience, that they didn't specifically come because they only love Monet.
Sure.
And that's what, and we don't have Monet because we're an American art institution, but still.
But we can look out
about
150 yards that way. You could probably find a few, right?
Yeah. And I remember studying art history, and my art history introductory course included architecture. And I remember studying architecture of the Kimball, studying Philip Johnson, and thinking, oh, those are incredible buildings. Too bad they're someplace I'm never going to go. And then showing up here, this cultural district, not just in terms of art collections, but in terms of the architectural riches of this place. So, I actually started by walking to work.
Right.
Because I'm super, I'm super East Coast
Must have either been
person.
In the spring or the fall, because I don't think you'd choose on a day like today.
It was actually early September, which was, it lasted 2 weeks.
Right.
But I would walk to work, and I'm walking past Ondo, through a Richard Serra sculpture, past Louis Kahn, to this temple on the hill, the Amon Carter by Philip Johnson, and I'm like, wow, this is really, I feel really fortunate to be in this environment. So
great. So where did you grow up? I know that you wound up going to Williams College, and so are you originally from the Northeast?
I am. So I grew up about half an hour north of New York City. So going to all those cultural institutions. So a little suburban childhood, and I was determined to study art history. And as a little kid, I went to Williams College, to the museum, and I actually sat next to, there was a dinner, and I sat next to the librarian, the rare books librarian, at this dinner. I was, I think, about 9 years old. And I sat in between a art historian and the rare books librarian. And this actually has an Amon Carter connection, which is why I'm telling the story. But I sat between the two of them. It was a dinner to which both my parents had been invited and me, and they sat, each of us at a separate table. So we were the heads of the table, which was really weird. I don't know why they were thinking that. And but they sat me in between a gentleman by the name of Charles Parkhurst and an art historian, Carol Clark. And Charles Parkhurst was a monuments man, so he was one of the people responsible for discovering Nazi looted art, and he was the rare books librarian for the college. And he asked me what my favorite book was, and we had an hour-long conversation about Charlotte's Web. And Carol Clark was an amazing art historian, and I just said, this is where I want to go to college. And there's a kind of interesting story that I hadn't realized until many years into my time here,
Right.
which is that Charles Parkhurst was one of the first trustees on the board of the Amon Carter, and Carol Clark was one of the great curators at the Amon Carter. So I guess maybe I feel it was a little bit destiny. So
Yeah.
she came to visit, and she recognized me by name from my 9-year-old self,
Right.
and by reputation for my curatorial work.
Wow.
But she had never put the two pieces together.
So you interviewed for your position
Apparently.
as a 9-year-old.
Apparently that was it. Yeah, and so I just, it was snowy and it was beautiful in the Berkshires in western Massachusetts, and I just decided at that point, if they'll have me, this is where I want to go to college, and kind of never look back. And partially because I knew I had this love for art history, and that was the locus of the Williams Art Mafia, and we're
Right.
everywhere. It's graduates of undergrad and the graduate program in Williamstown are
Right.
in all of these museums based on this great legacy of teaching with the actual objects and learning to articulate. Very, very few people nowadays look closely and learn how to actually speak about the formal qualities of the art.
Right.
And that was the emphasis of the
Right.
program. So, we could do gallery talks.
Right.
we can really delve into works of art. And some of my professors had me actually draw things. You had to take studio art to get an art history degree at Williams. Which was very scary to me. I mean,
I was about to say your face totally changed.
Yeah,
when you
no,
mentioned-
you can see that I went green, I think a little bit, but yeah, I was terrified, and it turned out to be one of the best classes I took in college because, you think of now as an art historian, and still many of us think of these artists as magicians, and they possess talents handed down that are instantaneous, and that's the narrative that we perpetuate, right? So Winslow Homer was a super genius, and he just was born that way, and nobody who wasn't born that way can ever do it. Right. And what I learned through studio art was there are tools that you can use, as well as practice and learning to look properly makes a big difference.
I was just listening to a talk the other night from Art Institute Chicago Archives talking about Homer's fascination with Chevreul's color study work, right?
Yeah,
which was a hugely influential piece of what the Impressionists were doing.
Yes.
But Homer, I guess Winslow Homer would have been implementing some of these concepts probably as early as 1860, right?
He gets this is a very cool. Chevreul and Homer. That's I was not expecting this. This is good. Yeah. So his brother, Winslow Homer's brother, is Charles Homer, who is an industrial chemist, and he goes over. So he's at the forefront of the field of paints and varnishes, and he goes over to France to the Gobelin tapestry factory, and that's where Chevreul is. And he brings back as soon as there's an English translation, he gives it to Winslow in the 1860s. Right. And from that point on, it's Homer's Bible. And I didn't realize this, but the actual book, the actual edition that he has, which I know because I made my mom get me one for Christmas one year, but it's maybe 3 by 5. Right. It's pocket size, and you can picture these artists plopping the book in their pockets, carrying it with them, and his is heavily annotated.
Right.
So you have it's very hard to recreate what an artist is thinking, but you can actually look at the book and say, okay, well, here's what he's thinking, because he underlined certain passages and made notations.
And he was really passionate about plein air, and so you need to be able to just drop in the pocket and go.
Yeah. And so I'm it's actually been a long time dream of mine. Now I'm going to reveal it to the world, and somebody else can do the show. But to do a show on Chevreul, because there's so many, and it goes beyond American art. So maybe not the Amon Carter, or maybe in partnership with the Kimball or something like that. But we talk about artistic influence, and we tend to place it on the individual. But there's so much going on in society that adds to the explanation of what's I was joking with a friend of mine is living in his truck, and he's a sculptor. And I said, what's going to happen is generations from now, art historians are going to say, oh, the scale of his work was reduced because of all